For those of you who are familiar with Masika Kalisha, one of Fetty Wap's baby mamas, many years ago, she was involved with a dude that I was very close with, or I am still very close with, when she was in her prime. And he was not a thug, he was not in the streets, and he had Masika Kalisha in her prime years. I'm talking about 20, 21 years old. Now I know she still looks good even today, even after becoming a mother, but believe me, she looked a whole lot better 15 years ago. But the point here is that Masika was heavily romantically and sexually involved with a college guy who was not in the streets, not a degenerate, back in Atlanta when she was in my circle. And they were together for close to 2 years. He had so many chances to knock her up, where he could have been the father of her first child, but he made a decision to always wear protection. And believe it or not, she was not the one demanding that he wear protection, nor was she on birth control. So she's just one of many examples that I know of that disprove this myth that black women only want thugs. They're all into the degenerate bums, and they give their best years to these guys, and then they want to come back to the educated men later. That may be true for some, but there's so many others that does not apply to. And I think what's actually happening here, I think there's a lot of crybabies, a lot of guys who just are not very good with women, and they're pointing the finger while not really considering all of the facts. And when I say these crybabies who are complaining, I'm not only talking about your educated men, because you've got degenerates who are also complaining. So there are men on both sides of the spectrum who are not very good with women, and they're pointing the finger at the other. And then there's one other factor too that I have to state before I start this video. A lot of you guys who complain that the pookies and the bums get all of the women, you fail to realize the price that he's paying, all the simping he's doing, all of his manhood that is being taken away from him by these women that date him so that they can control him because he's not in any type of position of power. You guys forget about this. You think it's easy for him to get these chicks? A lot of those dudes are paying a much higher price than any of you educated guys would be willing to pay. So you have to keep that in mind. So here's the thing, right? I think a lot of black men, especially online, YouTube and other social media, I think that you guys are mistaken about this whole myth of this love affair between black women and degenerate men, or black women and Pookie Ray Ray, whatever you call them, thugs. And this is a tricky one because it's actually based in truth, because there is some truth to it. But when you actually deal with the facts, you go a little bit deeper, you find out that this myth or this belief can be misleading. There are lots of black women that want nothing to do with thugs, and there are lots of Pookie and Ray Rays who are unable to attract black women. I've seen this all over the country, even in my own family. In fact, a lot of the men who are telling you that black women only deal with degenerate men, these men on YouTube and across social media, these men actually have children with black women. So you have guys that have had 1 or 2, maybe even more children with black women, but they're telling you that sisters only want degenerate men. So either they're wrong about that, or these guys themselves are degenerate. And maybe there's a little bit of both going on, but there's a lot more to this story. And another point that a lot of black men are missing is that Pookie and Ray Ray are often just as afraid of the successful man as the successful man is of Pookie and Ray Ray when it comes to competition for black women. I've witnessed it many times where the degenerate dude or the thug, he didn't trust his woman around the educated guy who had his shit together because he was afraid that the educated guy could take his woman. Or you'll have a bum or a thug who's unable to attract a woman in the first place, and he'll point the finger at the educated lames, blaming them. The same way that so-called educated lame blames the Pookie and Ray Rays for taking all the women, or they blame the women for going with the Pookie and Ray Rays, I've witnessed the Pookie and Ray Rays who cannot get women blame the educated men for using his success to take all the women. These so-called thugs are just as insecure as a lot of the so-called educated lames. Y'all are not paying attention to this. This is what you're missing. And I would have to ask this question. Why is it that me and family members of mine, friends of mine, co-workers, why have we been able to attract young black women in their prime? I'm talking about ages 18 to 26. Attractive black women. Why have we been given access to these chicks when they're in their prime, and none of us are thugs, and none of us were bums? And that leads me to the real point of my argument here, and that is that it's actually on the men, it's not on the women. And what I mean is that a lot of these chicks who end up a baby mama by a Pookie Ray Ray or having some degenerate dude's child, they did sleep with your educated or more successful guys, your so-called classic man. But that educated guy, more often than not, used a rubber. He made a decision not to impregnate her. You see? Whereas the guy who had nothing to lose out in the streets, he felt like maybe he could come up off of the woman, or he really just didn't have anything to lose, so why not go raw, right? I've been with many young sisters, and they never asked me to wear protection. That was my decision. I could have been a father many times over with a lot of black women in their prime, and I'm sure many of you could have too.